Thank you so much if you're tuned in to Grit and Glamour. This episode is super special to me because we're going to be talking about two of my favorite topics, social justice and spirituality, with one of my favorite people. I'm your host, Ruby Veridiano, and today we have on the show Lola Vinson. She is a personal development coach and also the communications director for Faith in Texas. I'm going to let Lola talk about Faith in Texas in a little bit, but I also want to say that this conversation is super special to me because Lola is also my prayer partner. So, every Sunday when we can, we get together and we really kind of join together and figure out how we can pray ourselves up and pray for the world. So this is an extension of that private conversation that we have. And we get so much out of it that we said, you know what, let's open it up and hopefully it sends light beams, ultra light beams to anyone who is hearing this conversation right now. So Lola, hi, tell us where you are and how you're doing today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here, Ruby, and I can't wait for this conversation. So I am currently in my living room here in Dallas, Texas. I am a California native, but I've been based in Dallas for the better part of a decade now. And I am feeling grateful today. I'm feeling excited and I'm feeling powerful today. So I hope that that energy just kind of, flows out and through the interwebs as we have this conversation.
Yes. And I want to share too that Lola and I are both California natives, but we met here in Paris when we were going to grad school together. We always reflect on how miraculous it is that the two of us coming from, really modest backgrounds in Northern California somehow ended up in Paris to live this incredible journey. So we're so grateful for that. And every time I go home, we somehow end up finding each other in my parents' hometown, which is like in Sacramento, California, which is a very far destination from Paris. So we make it work.
We do. And, I'm so grateful for technology because it really just helps keep those connections. I'm grateful for all of my friendships that span time and distance and, language and just every barrier. I think it's really great. I always look forward to our conversations and our check-ins, and I'm looking forward to kind of letting people into these, special moments that we have, because they truly are soul food and super powerful.
Yes. Well, speaking of soul food, we are going to start this question with, or this conversation with a question that is probably, kind of a lot, but I trust that you can articulate and answer it in a way that would be of service and also of great meaning. So I was asked this question the other day and I was like, wow, that's a lot to think about. So the first question is, how do you define spirituality?
Whew.
I told you.
We're jumping in. Okay.
We're going in.
Honestly, I think for me, I believe in a higher power. I believe that there is something that exists that is greater than our limited human understanding. So for me, spirituality is our individual personal journey and connection to that divine energy and being, like plain and simple. However that manifests for you in your life, that is your spirituality.
Yes, yes. And I want to also stress that if you're listening to this conversation is also for everyone, regardless of your spiritual beliefs or religious affiliations. This is just kind of the general, even though we both have our own spiritual foundations, we want to just share that kind of general meaning of like being able to be connected to a higher source. And I think for me, someone asked me that the other day, and I was thinking that it's really an empowering belief system, right? Because as human beings, we are limited in our capacity to understand what's happening in our lives. And sometimes we rely on facts and logic to, really interpret what's going on, but I believe that spirituality is an empowering belief system that allows us to redefine life's events, and gives it a sense of purpose and a greater meaning that's beyond us.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
can you also share what your spiritual background is?
Sure. So I grew up raised Kojic, which is Church of God in Christ, and that's like a Pentecostal denomination of Christianity. Relatively rigid and strict, like women don't wear pants in church, kind of strict. So my grandmother played a huge role in raising me. I've always been very close with my grandmother, and so she really was and continues to be kind of my North Star for just religious strength. And she was the foundation, and that's actually why, like, on all my social media, I'm Legacy Lola, because I'm named after her. And I kind of believe that I'm her legacy in some way. But so grew up Kojic, and I didn't necessarily know what that meant. It just, we went to church a million times a week. We weren't necessarily taught to question what we heard coming from the pulpit. It was just ritualistic. You did what you were told, and you kind of practiced, and just kind of is what it is. So now, as an adult, I'm really just non-denominational. I consider myself a Christian only insofar as that I am a believer in and follower of Christ, but I don't necessarily fit into any one denomination. And I believe there are many pathways to come to know the divine, and so this is my invitation, and this is how I kind of choose to walk that journey. But to say that it's the only way, that puts limitations on God that I'm not comfortable with. So for me, I'm like, I'm just going to walk my path, and this is the journey that I'm taking, and this is how I connect. And I'm also, very open and willing to hear how others do the same.
Yes, I love that. And I love that you talk about how it is multiple paths towards God. And I feel like I find myself praying with friends who are Muslim, praying with friends who are Buddhist, praying with friends who are Catholic. So I feel like there are so many ways that we can access that in our own lives. But at the end of the day, we're all connected to that higher power. So I love that.
Because I mean, ultimately, I believe there's one. And so how we choose to worship or not, or how we choose to nurture and cultivate that connection, that individuality is what's beautiful, and what makes it special for each person, so.
And I think what I appreciate about folks who are on a spiritual path is that we have a relationship to faith. And because of that, there's a trust that we have, regardless of what life throws at us. So I think right now that's very important. And I think we might have discussed this before, but it's such a privilege to have to have built that faith muscle, and to have been tested enough times to build that faith muscle, because now we're at this moment in our history that is so unprecedented. And I think that it's tempting to freak out and to be down on ourselves, and to be down about our lives because of all the different things that are coming our way. But faith allows us to be centered in something that allows us to trust that whatever is happening, there's something there that we need to grow from. So for you, I would love to ask you, what is your journey in your what does your journey towards building that faith look like? How did you build it?
Man, these questions are so deep.
I told you we were going in. It's not Super Soul Sunday for nothing.
I know, right? So I'll actually start, I'm going to go way back. And I promise I won't talk about my grandmother for the entire conversation, but again, she is like the foundation. She's the prototype. So I will start with the moment God actually became real to me. And I was about 9, 10 years old. I was living with my grandmother at the time, myself and my older cousin. And my grandmother never really cared to drive. She had been in a bad car accident, and she just was nervous behind the wheel. It wasn't like anything that she really liked to do after that car accident, and especially not in bad weather. And so, like I mentioned earlier, like we went to church, 4 or 5 times a week for one thing or another. And this particular evening, it had been pouring rain. Whoever said it never rains in Southern California was not telling the truth. But she'd been praying, like, Lord, please hold the rain. Like, I can't drive in the rain. And she prayed all the time. And so honestly, a lot of it would just go in one ear, not the other, especially like I was a kid. But I remember, we made it to church safely. There really wasn't any rain. It was pouring while we were in church. There was no rain when we got home. And so we pulled into the garage, we walked out, we entered the house. And the minute she shut the front door, I kid you not, it was like the loudest, like, boom of thunder, like crack, and then like buckets and buckets and buckets and buckets of rain. And she just went in and was like, minding her business. And my cousin and I looked at each other and we were like almost just shocked, really. And I ran back down the hallway and I was just like, Grandma, it's raining. She was like, I know. And I was like, but you prayed like for God to hold the rain until we got home. And she just was so unbothered. And she was just like, God is real and prayer works. So for me as a child, it was a very tangible way to be like, oh, okay, there is something up there. And in that moment, I was like, okay, God's real. That's a thing. But then I started having these moments of wrestling because, I had experienced a lot of things children shouldn't have to ever experience, and I survived a lot of abuse as a child. And so then it kind of became, well, if God is real, like, what did I do to make him so mad? Like, why doesn't he like me? Because, like, I didn't do anything to deserve, like the situation I'm in, or so what's up with that? And so I kind of then was like, I didn't have the desire to engage with getting to know God better. And so throughout, teenage years, and I just was kind of like, you stay over there and I'll stay over here. And again, because we were always in church, the seeds were planted, the foundation was laid, whether I liked it or not. But as I kind of came into, young adulthood and just started coming back around, and as I was living kind of more of a fast life, and I was just like dark, in general. And I didn't like that, but I felt like I felt myself kind of being drawn back to something. And so I just started kind of reintroducing myself to God and like recultivating that relationship, the God of my understanding. And I think the revelation for me was like, it wasn't God that was doing all of these things to me. It was God's grace that had sustained me through, and got me to where I was at that point. And, that transformation in my thinking really just kind of like shifted my entire outlook on life. And I really just was, shedding kind of like that darkness and the heaviness, and said, I just want to be light, in every sense of the word. So that it has definitely been a journey, because we often ask ourselves, like, why do bad things happen to good people, or why do bad things happen in general? If there is this God who's so loving, or this higher power who's so loving and sees everything, knows everything, like, well, why do we have to have suffering and heartache? And unfortunately, like, if I had the answer to that, I think I'd be onto something, but everything, there's an equal and opposite, a reaction, and maybe we just don't quite appreciate the sun as much, without the rain. But so I say all that to say, I think, just building that muscle has been, it's just a process of being willing to engage, because I believe God is with all of us all the time, waiting for us to say, hey, like, I want.
Uh-oh, we have a little technical difficulty. All right, let's just try to chat Lola and see if we can find her.
I think I cut out for a second.
Yep. Okay, that's okay. You're back. You are back. I was like,
um,
let me text her.
uh-oh, no, I'm here. So yeah, I think, God is, with us all the time, just kind of waiting for us to reach out. And like, when we want it, he's like, I'm there. And so the more you go to the gym, and work your muscles, the stronger you get. The more you run, you're going to build up your endurance. And so faith is the same way. The more you exercise it, the more you engage with it, the stronger, it gets. And it just comes from, I think, a desire to want that, and that hope, and faith that, like you were saying, there is something greater that kind of just gives you that motivation to like trust one more time and one more time after that. And I think that's just what it is, that constant cultivation.
Yeah, and what I love about folks who do have a spiritual channel or spiritual path is that when something happens that feels devastating, we bounce back quicker. I noticed that. But also, yes, we feel the pain and the hurt, but we also we have a belief system that allows us to reinterpret what that could actually mean,
Yeah.
right? Like we say, okay, like that happened for a reason, and this is the reason for that. Or how can I grow from this?
Mhm.
How can I continue to lean into gratitude despite this? Where is God in these details? And I
Yeah.
think that that's a big difference, because when you don't have that kind of support system, you're just thinking, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, and I'm hurt, I'm hurt, I'm hurt, and there's nowhere to lean on. That I think is really important to be able to reach out to a greater knowledge. So I think that that's what I love also about our conversations and our friendships is that, whenever there's something troubling, we can soundboard that and we can give it a different meaning.
Yeah. And I think, and ultimately, like being grounded in the fact that, for me, there's a scripture that says, all things work together for our good. And I can honestly say that I truly, I believe that, because there are some devastating things that I've experienced, in my past, that I directly see how it informs me today in my work that I do and the way that I engage with people, and just the way that I approach life for the better. And there's nothing that I would change or wish had gone differently now, because it would change, fundamentally, like who I am, and change my outlook. And e- everything came that, like, I was created for such a time as this. Like, our unique experiences, our unique resources, our unique gifts and talents are specifically designed for this moment. And wherever you are, you can be used and you can be of service. So I
Yeah,
think
and
that.
I also love that I've heard once someone saying that at times you feel like you're being buried by life, but in reality, you're being planted.
Yes, we're seeds. Yeah, absolutely. And there are seeds that I know were planted many, many, many moons ago that are just starting to flourish. And when I have those like little moments of like those light flashes where I remember, I'm like, oh, it's so good. And it's confirmation that I'm on the right path and I'm doing what I'm supposed to, do, as far as seeking my purpose and like walking in my divinely ordered steps.
And speaking of that, that is such a perfect segue to my next question, which is the work that you're doing on a daily basis. You're a communications director for Faith in Texas. Can you tell us a little bit more about the organization and the work that you're doing there?
Yeah. So I love Faith in Texas. Faith in Texas was honestly an answered prayer for me. And before I talk specifically about it, even just like how it came about, before I was doing PR and marketing for an international corporate law firm. And, my career honestly has always been about telling stories, back from when I was in production, documentaries, TV, all of that, to working with various brands, telling those brand stories, trying to sell to consumers, to, agencies, and just all of that. It's always been about telling stories. And so that's kind of like a full circle thing. But I had I was so unfulfilled. I was well paid, high visibility, like for all intents and purposes, like on paper, the job was great. You know, I should have been very happy, but I wasn't, because I felt like I was wasting my, like I just said, my divinely, given like gifts and talents. And, it's like I'm writing these stories about this multi-million-dollar merger where my people are dying. And I couldn't reconcile that anymore. And so I took a big leap of faith, and like among other life transitions that I was going through. And I just said, you know what, it's time for me to walk away. And it was a very like punctuated end to a chapter. And I just, decided that I'd go back to consulting and just kind of doing my own thing, until, and we've talked about this before, I said, my next full-time role, it has to do three things. I said, I want it to be fulfilling for me. I want it to be impactful for other people, and I want it to be glorifying to God. And I said, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how you intend but three things. And I just, like, I waited on that and I operated in that. And, people were like, well, what are you going to do? What's next? And, I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure yet, but I'm waiting on three things. And, when they show up in the right way, I'll know. And I've been always blessed in that way of, every life-changing, like pivotal moment, has usually been made what to outsiders looks like on a whim. But for me, it's just always like I'm filled with like this overwhelming sense of peace. And that's how I know that it's God saying, okay, this is what's next. And so Faith in Texas was no different. I hadn't heard of the organization. A friend of mine sent it to me and she said, this is your job. And I just kind of looked and I was like, oh, okay, like that sounds cool. Like, all right. And I just put it to the side. And a couple of weeks later, she sends me another email. It was like a newsletter. And she was like, look at your team, like, look at what they're doing. And I was kind of like, okay, like she's really like adamant about this. And so I started kind of looking into the organization and I was just like, wow, they are doing some great work. So let me just see what happens. And, sent in my inquiry and, that's all she wrote. And it was like a really fast turnaround. So Faith in Texas is a social justice organization, but a multi-faith, multicultural a movement that really fights for economic, social justice. We're united in values. So it doesn't matter to us whether you are Christian or Muslim or, Jewish. If you are, fighting for the same things we are, if you believe that everyone has the right to living wages and a safe place to live, and that they deserve to fully participate in the processes that govern their lives, like if you align that way, if your faith compels you in that way, or if you just believe in what we're doing, we want to work with you. And so we are really like squarely at the intersection of race, faith, policy. So we get to really be on the ground, just really fighting for justice, whether it's a policy campaign and like voter engagement, leadership development, research, strategic communications, obviously, and then, public action. So we're down here on the front lines.
Yeah. I love that. And I also love that your organization and really the work that you're doing there sits right on the intersection of our theme today, which is the connection between spirituality and social justice. So maybe you can help me break that down and unpack that a little bit more. What, in your perspective, what is the connection between those two things?
Well, I think ultimately it means something different for everyone because spirituality is so personal. But for most people, and it's just for myself, your faith compels you, to act, and we're supposed to, care for the least of these. And so what we see as the least of these now are the marginalized and vulnerable people in communities, and that's typically Black, brown, and poor people. And so just like if you are believer in and follower of Jesus, he was with the least of these. Like he fought for the least of these, those who did not have a lot of access to resources. They weren't rich. They weren't perfect people. They weren't in power. He was with the ones who were the opposite. And so for most people of faith, that is what compels them to move into this work, because it's the tangible way to, to manifest God's care and love for us.
And I also love, I want to just share a little bit about your vision statement. I'm just going to read it because I think that it was it resonated so much with me. So the vision statement of Faith in Texas envisions a world in which economic, racial, and social equity enable everyone to live in complete liberation, to pursue their divine purpose, and participate fully in the systems and processes that govern their lives.
Yeah.
That is such a perfect marriage between those two things. And I love that the words divine purpose exist in that vision statement.
Yeah.
Maybe you can help me break down what divine purpose means to you.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I think, it comes back to the way that everyone is, first of all, everyone is created in God's image, right? So every human is inherently worthy, full stop, like without conditions, without any fine print, with no, just that's it. Like you are here, you are worthy. And everyone has a purpose that feeds into just the overall fabric of humanity. So what that looks like is different for everyone. And so as we were even, crafting the vision statement, we brought together, it wasn't something that was just like, created in a vacuum. We brought in people, from our base of followers, from different clergy, different backgrounds, to say, how does this speak to not just different faith backgrounds, but just people in general? How will this resonate? Because although, faith is in our name, we are faith-based, we're not exclusive. There are some people who don't associate with a particular religion or faith practice, and they're welcome too. They have a purpose too, because I like to say that even if you don't believe in God, you can still believe in good, right? Like we all believe in something. We all believe in justice and equality. And so those are the things that we're really rallying behind, because for us, justice is what love looks like in public. Like we've heard that, like that's God's manifestation. So like, how do we work on creating, beloved community in his kingdom here on earth while we're here?
Yes. And I also, what comes up for me when I think about divine purpose is really not pursuing just a career, but a calling. And
Yes.
I think that that's what's different about friends like you, who I can really speak to about this, because when you're pursuing a calling, you don't get discouraged that easily. And when you do fall, you always find the strength to get back up, because you know that what you're doing is something that you're being called to do.
Mhm.
And it creates a different meaning. It's not just a job. It's something that it's your unique contribution to the world. How are you aligning with that divine assignment that you've been given to
Yeah.
really use the gifts and talents and skills that you've been uniquely blessed with to then contribute to the fabric of justice and peace and harmony, and love. So I love that. You
And
know,
when you say, about a calling, there's absolutely, like, there's an endurance that I think is kind of inherently built into a calling versus a career. You could change careers like that, but a calling, you could run from it if you could try, but at some point, and I've said
oh,
before,
believe
like,
me, I've tried.
same sis, same. Like, no matter, and I've said this before, like, God is going to get out of you what he put in you no matter what. So it's up to you how easy you make that process for yourself. The more you fight it, the harder it's going to be, because please believe you're going to come full circle and you're going to end up, like where God needs you to be for him to use you. So when we fight and when we run, for me, it came down to, I had to stop being really disobedient, because it's like I was coming into the understanding of what I believed that I was meant to do. And as the picture became much more clear, then like my humanness kicked in, and I'm like, oh, that scares me. I don't want to do that. I'm not good enough. I'm not ready. I need, the checklist that we, often like run down in our heads that distracts and deters us from what we're supposed to do and where we're meant to go. But what kept coming to me was, this is not about you and it's not for you.
Mm,
You're just supposed to do your part.
yeah.
And I was like, I can't keep stopping my progress and my blessings individually, but also those, that of everyone who's meant to be blessed by what I'm supposed to do. Like I'm now hindering their destiny and their journey. Like there are people waiting on me to do what I'm supposed to do. And I can't keep like stopping and hindering that process. So even like my screensaver says, somebody somewhere is depending on you to do what God has called you to do. And so I see that every day, multiple times a day. And it just kind of gives me this indefatigability, I guess, to just say, all right, one more time, let's go.
I'll say though that there's definitely failures on the journey,
Oh,
right? Because faith doesn't get built without the testing. Uh,
mhm.
and I said this the other day, but we learn more from our losses than we do our wins. And so I think that that's what can be difficult, right? Like the reason why I said earlier that I've tried to give up on whatever dream that I had was because I kept coming across a closed door. And I started to question, is this the right door? And at the end of the day, I always have this, this inner intuition that's like, just try one more time.
Yeah.
Try one more time, and maybe you're going to do it a little bit differently. But the thread has always been there. Like you, I'm a storyteller. So there are many different ways that we tell stories. You could be telling a story for a brand or organization. You could be telling a story through an article that you've written. You could just be telling your story through, the speaking and the workshops that you get to do with other people. But I think right now more than ever, we need to be aligning ourselves with the roles that we want to play to really contribute to the collective healing process that the world is so desperately calling us on to do, whether it's environmental justice or this, fight against racism.
Mhm.
It's the time is now for us to really align with ourselves with that and to be brave in
Yes.
stepping into the big shoes that we are being called to fill. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, and even the work that you do that's so powerful in the fashion space, like that is a part of the revolution and the resistance, like finding that, like, brands that exploit, that's at the, exploitation and commodification, like really is at the root of our, capitalist society, but, at the underthread of that is the women who are exploited. And so because you're, a women's empowerment champion, and you said, I can merge the two in this way where a lot of people don't think about where their clothes come from and what that means and how that, impacts economies and family and women. And so everything ultimately can come back and be justice, and everything is spiritual if you make it so. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's bring it back a little bit to the work that you're doing at Faith in Texas, because I know you've been extra busy lately. Like you said, you are on the front lines. What does that look like? What have you all been working on? I know that you have a couple of different projects, but what does it look like from the ground, and what are the things that you're doing?
Yeah. So, for example, even when COVID kind of first hit, and they started shutting down all over the country, and then just kind of started moving closer and closer. And so when we shut down, I remember laughing because a lot of my friends were like, "I don't have anything to do. I'm at home. Like, let's have a Netflix watch party together." And I was like, y'all, I'm busy, like busy, busy. So that looked like us immediately mobilizing to say, okay, um, people are being ordered to shelter in place. They can't work. How are they going to be able to afford um, their rent? be able to afford their daily necessities? Are they going to be able to eat? So, we immediately started working on helping get a moratorium passed so people couldn't be evicted during, shelter in place. Working on, figuring out who can tell utility companies that they can't shut off people's utilities, right? To say, hey, if we're being ordered to shelter in place, but if you cut off someone's electricity or their gas, like they're not safer at home, And so again, it's looking at who's the most vulnerable, who's going to get hit hardest in a crisis. And it's typically Black, brown, poor people. And so we're, uniquely positioned to liaise with, local officials to kind of represent those groups of people and make sure that we're advocating for solutions that have their best interests front and center. And so most recently, with the unfortunate and senseless murder of George Floyd, and as protests erupted across the nation and the world, really, this is now a global movement. But there were protests going on in Dallas, and they got heated, really quickly, just like they did in other places. And Faith in Texas, we also operate a bail fund, the Luke 418 bail fund. And so with that, it's a part of our larger work to end the use of cash bail in Dallas County. But we were able to be of support to those who got arrested for exercising their, First Amendment right to freedom of speech. So those are kind of like the tangible things that put us like squarely in the center of all the chaos that goes on, because we are then advocating and we're right there with who needs us the most.
Mm.
Yeah.
And what are you seeing on the ground?
It's pain, like it's like full stop. It's agony, and everyone is just tired, and fed up. And I think that a lot of times, it's been a sense of helplessness because you don't know what to do, and it feels really big, and it feels like one voice can't do enough or one action isn't enough. It's like mopping the ocean or something. But the fact of the matter is, if enough of us bring our one, right, then we become many. And I think ultimately it's just been a lot of grief, like born like throughout generations, that is finally erupting. Those broken out windows and fires, and like that's just literally the tangible manifestations of like what people have been carrying in their bodies for all these years, and it's just finally coming up, and people are now fired up and ready to act. Like we want this to be the last time. Like we want to be able to say never again. And that's actually, that was the theme of our march just yesterday we hosted. And our rallying cry was never again. Like it's time for us to say, as people of faith, as just, humanity, as leaders, as a city, as a nation, never again. So what radical action do we have to be willing to engage in for the foreseeable future until we get what we came for, until we see the results that we need? And so that's what it looks like on the ground. It's gritty. It's not pretty, but it's powerful. And in that, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And I can imagine how draining it must be to be on the front lines. But you are always smiling, and every time I call you, I could hear the smile in your voice. What role does your faith play in keeping you restored and refilled so that you could continue being there for other people?
Oh, really, my faith some days is the only thing that keeps me going. And some days it feels really heavy. But I also know that despite, like, I know how busy I am and I know how busy we are as an organization, there are folks doing more and that are even closer to it than we are and that I am, And so even when it feels the heaviest and when things feel, constricting and dark, I'm still grateful. Like I have to lean into that gratitude because for me, I'm reminded that A, this is what I asked for. B, this is what I've been uniquely, created and blessed to be able to do. And it's a way that I'm able to be of service in this moment. And so I'm thankful and I say, okay, God, like for such a time as this. So let's keep going. And it's only faith. And I'm deeply, deeply motivated in the fact that when I do have children, I don't want them to be in this.
Yeah.
I want to create something better for all of the children of today and those are, who are yet to come. And that it drives me.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. And speaking of, well, we talked earlier about divine purpose. I know that you execute your divine purpose in other ways, not just in your role with Faith in Texas, but you're also doing work or beginning to do work as a personal development coach. Um,
Yeah.
how is that connected to your divine purpose? What is your approach in that lane? And who do you intend to serve?
Yeah, so coaching it was one of the things that I fought. Um, I didn't want to be a coach. Like by trade or with any formality. I was like, no, that wasn't for me. And when it kept kind of coming up, I just be like, nah, that's not my lane, right? That's not my ministry. Everyone has their lane. And I didn't feel like it was mine, but it's been a very kind of organic and undeniable process because I get so much joy from helping people find their light. And for me, like light is really synonymous like with divinity and that connection to the divine. And so when you find that, it then begins to shine and you help other people, like that light just then like reverberates. So it's been organic, like I said, and my approach really is like me. I'm very straightforward. I'm raw. I'm gritty, and I know that the road to freedom is not pretty, and that's personal freedom. Because you've got to unpack all that ugliness that's in there and kind of get rid of all of that and the places that you're broken. Like how do we piece that back together, and I don't have the answers. It's really just my job to help you find what's already inside of you. The answers are everything we need is inside of us, and so we just need people to help pull it out and put the pieces together, and that's what I seek to do. And ultimately, for me, it's women who are, they have the courage to want to get unbound. There are so many things that keep us tied down, keep us like constricted, and really prevent us from operating and walking in our full purpose. And so sometimes you just need somebody to kind of give you that extra push or, help you see things in a different way and just help kind of unbind those ties. So you can actually just like be free. And once you do that, like you've changed, not only your life, but everyone who's connected to you. And so for me, it's like, let me help you like find your light and leave your legacy. Because again, for me, it's all about, a legacy that we leave behind. Like, what are we doing for people who come behind us?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
especially as women of color, I think we also have the shared passion to really lift the people who, who come from the same background as us and to show them that, things are possible regardless of where you come from or
yeah,
how you grew up. Your dreams are valid and they're possible and there's place for it. And look, we have taken leaps of faith
mhm,
and we have ended up in Paris somehow in one part of our lives despite all of the challenges that we had to go through and the hoops that we had to cross just to get here.
yeah,
And I love that also our shared mission to empower women is something that we connect on. And I don't think that we would have been ready to empower other people had we not gone through the fire ourselves.
absolutely.
Because if we've never been through something, right, like we wouldn't be able to tell someone like, hey, I've been there, or this is an example of how I got out of a situation that you're facing. So I love that we share
Like
that.
the saying that says, some women are burned by the fire, others are built in it, they're forged in it. And so I know that, we've had so many conversations, like we have been forged in the fire. you
And
know,
we've been trained, as you were saying, for a moment such as this. Um,
yeah.
and I love that you continue to be smiling. I know that you said earlier that it's intense on the ground, but you still have access to joy. And I know that that is a priority for you, because joy for you is an act of resistance.
Yes.
You help me unpack that. And maybe there are, I know that for me, I do a lot of work to refill myself, right? So I think that that's why I could have access to joy, because it's been not just like this year, but like really 15 years of intentional, inner foundation. And it takes a long time to build that mountain inside of us. But I think there's been moments where I felt guilty for feeling joyful, given the craziness that we are in. Um, so I would love for you to help me unpack why joy is actually necessary in this moment, and to not feel the guilt in accessing that.
Yeah. We are in a society that profits off of pain, profits off of
Ooh,
are,
mm,
telling us that we're unworthy, that we're not good enough, exactly right, how we are. Buy this, it'll change this, get that, do, all of these things. And so no matter what, we're always pushed, especially in America. And like, I'll digress for a moment, right? That was one of the things that once I adjusted to it, I loved about being in Paris. There was just like a different zest for actual like quality of life, and not like the rat race that we're thrust into here incessantly in America. But it's a whole other conversation. But we're in this society that is completely built on a scarcity mindset. There isn't enough, you are not enough, you need more, right? And so to be joyful and to say, I am happy in the skin I'm in the season I'm in the space I'm in, right? Like, I'm finding my joy despite everything that you're telling me, despite the obstacles against me. Like, that in and of itself is resistance. That in and of itself is revolution. So I do try to find little bits of joy wherever I can and whenever I can. And when work starts to feel particularly taxing or heavy, it's like, okay, let me lean into some gratitude, because I think gratitude and joy are like inextricably linked. You can't have one without the other. And there is always something to be grateful for. There
100%.
is never a moment that your eyes are awake, or that that you are alive and breathing, that you don't have something to be grateful for. And so if we can lean into that, and then, grow it, like allow it to bloom, and just hold tightly to things that bring us joy, um, that's resistance. And it's beautiful. And especially now when we think about Black people being under such attack, and as a Black woman, seeing how we are even being marginalized and sidelined in this conversation, when we talk about white supremacy and racist violence and police terror. I have a list of literally more than 100 women, Black women and girls, who've been killed at the hands of police, and we don't talk about them as much. We don't hear about them as much, because it becomes about the men. And we can't do that. And so as a Black woman, I feel like it's part of my duty to be seen in my full humanity.
Mm,
Because you're not going to define me by pain and by suffering. Define me by the light, by the joy, by the happiness, by the positivity, and not all of the opposite that has been thrust upon us.
yeah.
So yeah,
I love that you said that. And I think for me, as someone who is committed to allyship, part of me wanting to cultivate my joy so that I could have room to hold space for other people, so
mhm,
that I could have enough to give someone else if they're not feeling good. And obviously there are days that I'm also down, but at the same time, I'm very intentional about like, how could I refill myself so that I could hold space for other people, so that I have enough energy to fight for others.
Yeah.
Because we can't run on an empty tank.
Yeah, and I was gonna say we can't pour from an empty cup. We were like right aligned. We have to give from our overflow.
Yes,
We
exactly.
shouldn't be giving from a space of depletion. And so it's intentional and very necessary, to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And even that was like kind of a light bulb moment for me because I really will like I will go and go and go and go and go and I will be tired um and I'll just, okay, if you didn't do it, I will pick up the slack and do it because it needs to be done. Um, and I mean, I was really like coming up on like burnout, and I have burned out before. But the revelation was I can't be of full service if I'm not taking care of myself. So I owe it to myself. I owe it to the movement. I owe it to my space in this fight, right? To be 100%. Like, I don't want to enter the ring. I don't want to come on the front lines like at, 40% when I had the opportunity to make sure that I was at 100. And so it's now a part of um, the work that you have to do the work to be well so we can keep fighting because this is a marathon. you
Yes,
know
I love
it's
that.
not media attention might start to dissipate, and we're in a society that has a really short attention span, but this is different
Mm,
because the whole world was shut down. Like COVID had everybody at home more or less. You can't turn away from it, you can't be distracted, it's in your face, and it's bringing to the surface things that have been, none of this is new. Right, so this is just that's been under the surface for generations. That's how we have to make sure that, and that's why we have to make sure that we're really prepared for the long fight. And you can't do that if you're not taking time to take care of yourself.
yeah.
um,
And as you said, this is a marathon. This isn't just a sprint, or this is not a moment. This is a movement that has been happening for quite some time now. And, there are people who have finally are on board, after all the years that I think folks like us have been doing to like be organized, or, in being involved in our own activism. I think that for me personally, I'm super glad to see more and more people actually wanting to take action. So
mhm.
for those who do want to continue being involved past this month, right? But for the long term, how can they get involved either with Faith in Texas, or what are your suggestions in making sure that we are all here for the long haul?
Yeah. Ultimately, I would say it's about making sure that you are educated and informed. There is a lot of learning and unlearning that has to be done to get us where we want to go. And that is an individual process. One of the most frustrating things for most Black folks are well-meaning allies, particularly white folks, that are like, tell me what to do. Like, I want to help. And it's like, you know what? No, we've been saying this stuff for years. Like, we've been asking, don't ask us and expect us to do the work for you. Google it, start researching. There are tons of books. There are brilliant minds who have studied this stuff and who have put out articles and publications, and there are films. So just start engaging with the process. Like, make it your business to put dismantling these systems, of white supremacy and its systems, as a part of your life. Like, you're now put on notice that, okay, how can I intentionally be a full participant in this work? Where are you spending your money? Are you willing to be inconvenienced to shop a small business or a Black owned business? You might have to wait a little bit longer. You might have to pay a little bit more money. But in turn, you're feeding that family, you're funding the movement, that is an act of resistance because you're not feeding into mainstream society even in that way, right? So small things. Definitely get connected to an organization that is near and dear to your heart, whether it's something that's local in your community or whether it's something that's nationwide. when everything popped off with the protesters, we started hearing from people all over. Like, hey, we can donate to your bail fund. Like, local people then also said, can I volunteer? Do you guys need food? Like, can I water, first aid, everything, people were raising money. It was so beautiful to me. Someone was doing custom t-shirts, custom pins, astrology readings, baking bread. Like everyone said, hey, this is my gift. This is what I know how to do really well. And I want to use it to, participate in this movement. So it's really not far off from where you are. Like the revolution and the resistance is in you. It's in the decisions that you make every day and how you choose to use your gifts and talents. So stay informed, get connected to an organization, whether it's Faith in Texas or anything else, wherever you are. And ultimately, let's get ready to vote, right?
Yes.
I would not ever get off this call without saying, make sure you are prepared to vote. Do your research. It is not just about the president, okay? It's not just about the president, and that's all I'll say about the current occupant of the White House. But district attorneys, sheriffs, county commissioners, judges, all of these things are, these are roles that have a tangible impact on our daily lives, and they're all elected officials. So when, we saw that, there's a certain law passed, I can't remember, but there was something where there was like 3 people who voted against it. Guess what? Vote them out.
Yeah.
If our elected officials are not proving that they're acting in our best interests, guess what? They have to go, right? That's on us.
Yep. And I will say that one thing that I have committed to paying more attention to that I hadn't before, because I've been overseas, right? I've been participating in the national elections, but hadn't been doing too much with the local elections. And like you said, that's where the, nuts and bolts happen. That's where the real change happens. So if you're listening and you haven't paid attention to your local elections, now is the time. We don't have a choice. I want to bring it back to what you said about knowing where you spend your money, because just to bring it back really quickly to the work that I do in sustainable fashion, on the front lines who are making our clothes are Black and brown women. So if you are choosing to support a sustainable brand or incorporating sustainable habits in your shopping life, you are also participating in acts of anti-racism, because it's the Black and brown women who are making our clothes, who are the most disadvantaged, who are the most marginalized, and who are affected most by COVID, just like what you said about all the folks who are struggling because of the racial and economic disparities, right? So I think people don't really think about that when they're shopping. They see a t-shirt, they see whatever, and we don't stop to think about how it's made. But when you look at the facts and you look at all of the roots of that material, it was made by human hands, a lot of them Black and brown women who are the most vulnerable. So I appreciated you saying that. And Lola, you're frozen again, but I hope you're going to come back soon, because I definitely want to direct people to where they can find you. And Lola's still frozen, but there she's back now. She's back now.
I don't know if you heard the loud thunder crack behind me. That's why I was like, okay. Yeah, the storm is starting here, but it's okay.
Okay, did your grandma send that?
She very well may have. Listen, that sassy lady. Right. I know exactly where I got it from.
Well, where can folks find you and support you?
Yeah, so you follow me on social media at Legacy Lola, both on, mostly I'm most active on Instagram. Sometimes I dabble in Twitter, but mostly there. And I'm gonna start putting out more content, especially about coaching and all of that as I develop it, and some other brands and projects that I have coming up, as I'm at liberty to share. They'll be put out through there. But definitely just be connected, reach out. I love having conversations like this because they're needed, and it's hard to kind of have in a safe way, because people have a lot of questions, and you don't want to say the wrong thing, and so I love that you're willing to use your platform to have such a powerful conversation. And especially, I know that I have to be much more intentional about using my platform because I've always been very comfortable making things happen behind the scenes. That's kind of why I went into production. Like, I don't need to be in front of the camera. I'm calling the shots behind, or I'm helping you tell your story. But someone just recently sent me a message, a good friend of mine, and she said, you're the single reason why I'm aware. She's a white girl, so, like, I mean, sweetheart. And she said, you took the time with me a few years back to explain the importance of, what's going on and why I need to use my voice. And we were having the Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter conversation. And she literally said, like, no one had ever taken the time to explain it to me, and you are the reason that I'm able to be comfortable being vocal. And that stuck with me because it just kind of reminded me that, for such a time as this, and everyone is meant to touch and reach someone. And so the more that you're quiet, the more that you're not leaning into your power, it's not just you that you're stifling. You're stunting everything that's meant to flow through you. So yeah.
I love that. And I love that we can end on that note.
Yeah.
So Lola, thank you so much for having our Super Soul being willing to have our Super Soul Sunday session with the world today.
Yeah, I loved
Yes.
it.
So thank you for joining me. And for all of those who are watching, thank you so much for joining in on another episode of Grit and Glamour. And stay tuned for the next episode. And I hope that this filled you up today. We'll see
Yes.
you again next
Thank
time.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.